Hello and welcome to the EFN Presents review for Season 4, Episode 19, For Whom the Sweetie Belle Toils. I'm Ramble, and joining me today from EFN News, I have Reldan.
Heyo!
So I guess the first point, I love the pun in the title, but I didn't get much of a Hemingway vibe from this episode, did you?
Not so much. I mean, it's a pun though. It doesn't necessarily have to make perfect literary sense, I suppose. It's kind of fun though. I mean, I enjoy a good play on words, as people probably can see with the way that I usually title my stuff.
Well, I guess the most important thing of this episode is that this is the second Luna Dream episode, the first one being
Sleepless in Ponyville back in Season 3, which I still think is probably the second best episode of that season, and really is probably one of my top favorite episodes of the entire series.
Absolutely. So what did you think of them bringing that back and how it changed from the first time that they built up an episode around the idea?
I really, really liked it. It was a great concept. It certainly was something where when they did it the first time, it's like I took a step back and I'm like, this actually kind of makes sense. I wasn't expecting. I mean, there was no reason to think that, Luna, moon powers, princess of the night, all of that, also is like a dreamwalker. And this is just like one of the many services she provides. But, the more I think about it, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. What I found interesting was that last time around, when she was doing this service with Scootaloo, it was a matter of kind of helping him get through his nightmares. And in this case, it was flipped around entirely, and it was more like she was creating a nightmare to teach Sweetie Belle a lesson. So it was a similar vibe in terms that it's Luna doing something while you sleep and helping you, but the way that they went about doing it was complete opposite of what we had seen before.
Did you just call Scootaloo a dude?
I hope not.
You said help him get through his problems. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
I just had to throw that in there. Well, definitely the two episodes, there are a lot of differences in terms of what was prompting Luna's presence, for her to appear in their dreams. And I think that almost shows up in how they styled the dreams as well, because in Sleepless in Ponyville, it was a very stylized, nightmarish dreamscape. Whereas a lot of the dream sequences in this episode were very grounded in reality, the awards ceremony, right? Other than all of a sudden this rarity-shaped cloud starts melting the trophy and everything.
Well, I mean, I would agree. I think that the way that they went about the dream sequence this time was a different take. It wasn't this kind of fairy tale trapped inside a horror story sense that you got with the Scootaloo scenario. It was more like rough cuts of transition between them. Like, here's something that actually happened. I think that was kind of the point though, was almost everything that occurred within Sweetie Belle's dream, the point of it was to make it seem very real, because in some cases it was a memory or something that really had occurred, or in other cases it was an example of something that might actually occur. It maintained that sense that you were still in a dream, because it kind of had those little trippy transitions of, swimming through the air and, crazy dolphins swimming around and
Yeah.
all of that kind of thing. And like the star road that they're running down. But then it's like those were just like the cue that, oh, you're still in a dream. But then boom, it's like, you're going to get a hefty dose of reality interspersed between them.
Yeah, Sweetie Belle's issues were focused on, like, a lot of the time actual events, whereas with Scootaloo it was more monsters in the shadow type of fear, whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, what Sweetie Belle was afraid of in this one, it were real things. I mean, this wasn't the same thing before where, Luna is teaching Scootaloo to get over, don't be afraid of things that aren't really there. This was Luna teaching Sweetie Belle that, there are some things, it's like this is something to worry about. This, you don't want to see this come to pass. It's like, this is a nightmare, but this is a nightmare that, could be reality if you don't do something.
Well, it's one that you bring on yourself through your actions, which is even, I like the little just nod to what happened to Luna. She recalls her and what happened with her and Celestia. And
oh yeah, that was perfect.
It was. It's something I didn't really think about when Luna came, but when she mentioned it, I'm like, that's actually an interesting parallel there, that she personally relate to Sweetie Belle's situation here. Some people were conjecturing exactly, well, whose dreams does Luna show up in? And, is she in everybody's dreams or whatnot? But I think that if someone was going to go through the trouble of thinking, well, why would she show up in Sweetie Belle's dream? I think that connection between her situation and Luna's past definitely would give cause for for her to say, maybe I should step in here.
Oh yeah, I think another thing that really shows that that's the case here, where this is something that is near and dear to Luna's heart. It's something that she actively wants to prevent. Is that on top of showing up and doing the whole dream nightmare thing, she also actually shows up in person, physically, to ensure that things go and work out right. I can't imagine that, every single pony all across Equestria that Luna helps out, in addition to helping out in their dreams, she also shows up the next day and is like, hey, how you guys doing? Let me give you a hoof here.
Yeah. Well, Luna's character side for a bit, this is about Sweetie Belle. This story is about Sweetie Belle. And I've heard some people say it's showing growth in her character. It's not showing growth in her character. We've seen her act out before. Sisterhood of Social, they have a history of arguing and bickering. But it definitely seems to come to a head here. Sweetie Belle's having a bit of a meltdown at the beginning here.
Well, it's an understandable meltdown. I mean, if you really look at things from her perspective, she honestly, I look at her character and she doesn't really have that many, I guess you would say, wins in her record. It really is kind of the case that she does seem to manage to mess up most things that she tries to do. And here we actually have her, as far as we can tell, pouring a lot of herself and putting a lot of effort into putting this whole play together. I mean, she says she's writing it, she's directing it, she was poorly attempting to costume for it, she's acting in it. And I mean, from her point of view, she gets done with this, and her sister, who threw a few costumes together in what seemed like, practically no time at all, pretty much isn't even there and steals the show away from her. I mean, it's one of those things where it's not fair of her to blame Rarity for it, but at the same token, I do kind of feel where she's coming from, that she'd be kind of upset in that situation, to feel like you work so hard for something and to see that someone else, basically, it's like it didn't matter how hard you worked on it, because it makes your work feel like it was meaningless, or that it's worthless.
That reminds me of actually Apple Bloom's situation in Some Pony to Watch Over Me. It's for different reasons, but Sweetie Belle was proud that this is something that she had done on her own, that it's going to kind of differentiate her, and once again she almost finds herself in her sister's shadow. Though everything that comes up in this episode really comes back to Sweetie Belle's fault. She leaves the asking Rarity for help on the dresses till the last minute, which means that there isn't any kind of collaboration or whatnot. She just has to show up with the dresses, or she can't help at all.
Yeah, but at the same token, when the other Crusaders were asking her about that, I mean, they were all operating under the assumption that, of course, she would have gotten Rarity's help right from the start, which it sounds like, was a couple weeks prior. But finding out that basically this was something where Sweetie Belle honestly wanted to do it herself, I mean, I think that's kind of where she was coming from. I think if she could have gotten away with it, she would have tried to not have felt the need to lean on Rarity at all. But with the night before, looking at those horrible dresses, of which I would like to point out that Applejack, when she had the cutie mark switched in Magical Mystery Cure, still didn't make anything quite that bad. I think that was the point where she's looking at that and realized it's yeah, we can't actually go up on stage in these. We really need help at this point.
Didn't she learn a lesson in Showstoppers? I mean, she's not the dressmaking type. But the dresses aside, even after the show, they're kind of upset or surprised that the main six aren't there, despite the fact that they're not there because they had to help Rarity catch up. Spike says she was way behind. She still helped Sweetie Belle out, but it meant that they couldn't make it to the show. So the situation that she's complaining about after the fact is her fault for not asking for help earlier as well, even if it comes down to her wanting to do this on her own.
Oh yeah, that's certainly the case. She doesn't really succeed at many things. And that's hopefully they're building it up because at some point she is going to find that one thing that she actually is really, really, really good at and latch onto that and blow everybody away. But for right now, she still is a little bit, I don't know. She's not exactly good at the whole execution of anything, really.
Well, no, and they have to keep that part of the characters, I guess, a mystery or a secret, because a lot of it still is the discovery and the journey. That's a lot of what their characters are good for, and a lot of the older CMC episodes are built up around.
Well, I know recently, in just a few episodes ago, we had Twilight Time, where I both gave Sweetie Belle props for taking the lead and standing up, making decisions and doing things. It just was kind of a shame because her plans pretty much just never worked out in any way whatsoever. So it's like, on one hand, it's like she's making the attempt, and that's a notable thing, and that's a good thing. That shows growth on the part of her character. She just hasn't got that part where the things that she attempts to do, she succeeds at doing them. That's the thing that she still needs a little bit of work.
Well, I think there's more confidence in the characters and their endeavors, but it still comes back to they're out of their element a lot, and that's where a lot of the conflict comes from. And I know we talked about this earlier in Some Pony to Watch Over Me, and in this, a trend that I'm almost seeing is that the consequences of what is very much more grown up and very real, as opposed to in the past where the situations were those faced by children and the consequences were those faced by children. In Some Pony to Watch Over Me, yes, there's comedic elements and the villain wasn't great, but there was still a chimera that was planning to eat Apple Bloom. And in this, she almost destroys Rarity's career and her livelihood. Those are some rather big consequences to face for the characters for not having really grown up that much from when we've seen them in the earlier seasons.
I would agree with that to some extent, although I do maintain that fighting a cartoon monster in a fire swamp is to me, that's a little bit of a different type of crisis situation to go through than what we saw with Sweetie Belle in this episode. Because in one case, it's a very obvious kind of allegory of dealing with like an external demon. But in Sweetie Belle's case, she's definitely, a lot of it is she's fighting her own inner demons. It's like her own sense of trying to come out from underneath Rarity's shadow, and her feeling like, I think that initial dream that nightmare that she has before Luna steps in, where everything's going her way, and then her sister's like this giant like thunder rain cloud that just sweeps in and just like blows away everything that she's accomplished. I mean, that's
literally rains on her parade.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the demon that she has to try to exorcise from herself. And I think that's something that in a lot of ways I think is more relatable for an audience. It's something where I certainly, looking at that, can see the difficulties and kind of the trial that Sweetie Belle is going through in a way that I really can't relate to, fighting for my life in a flaming pit in terms of how Apple Bloom's scenario was set up.
That's true, but there is also that balance between the more slice of life episodes and the adventure based, the more fantastical episodes. And I will say that technically all the villains are cartoon villains because they're in a cartoon, but the Chimera I would say is mythological. So it's not like something they just created. There's actually is a pretty good basis, and there were stories before cartoons. I don't know where I'm getting with that.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And I just want to go on the record because it's one thing that I've seen get brought up again and again. But the reason why the Chimera is in a fire swamp is not because of the Princess Bride. It's because in the original myth of the Chimera comes from Mount Chimera, which is basically a fire swamp. But that's the reason why that setting is there. So it's actually a much, much, much older reference than the one that I think is commonly assumed to have been used by the writer on that one.
Well, yeah, there are absolutely no ROUSs in the swamp, were there? So clearly not.
Yeah, nor lightning, nor any lightning sand.
Well, this episode definitely works because the dynamic that we had built up and established of there being some infighting and whatnot between Sweetie Belle and Rarity, but I definitely agree that it is maybe more relatable than perhaps Apple Bloom's story, at least for more people, because after a certain point you stop being babied by siblings or parents. I know people well into their 20s that are, for no fault of their own, almost living under a sibling's shadow because they're not the successful one, right? And that's something that I think people really of any age can almost relate to. Whatever you accomplish, it's still kind of you get shown up at every step of the way, right?
Oh yeah, and what really makes it hit home is when you feel like you're getting shown up by somebody that you otherwise personally, you know them on a personal level. You may consider them to be good friends, and you may even realize or know that they're not actually out there doing anything to purposely try to hurt you. It's just kind of like, this is the situation that you're or this is like the hand that you're dealt with, but you still are going to have sometimes those negative feelings and those negative emotions crop up. And one of the huge lessons in life is basically figuring out how you're going to respond. I mean, are you going to let that sort of thing control you and, cause you to take actions that you might regret later? Or are you going to, take a step back, take a deep breath, and, basically, figure out, some other way to push beyond the way you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. And the actions that Sweetie Belle undertakes are certainly rather dire. The sabotage of the headdress. I mean, it's nice. There's that connection there because her sister destroyed something important to her, the play. So she ends up destroying something important to her sister. But honestly, this may be one of the worst things we've seen a character do intentionally in the show. And I've said this was more in earlier seasons that I wish they would focus more on consequences of actions, because I think that that's something important to get across. The fact that sometimes you can't just apologize, sorry isn't good enough. Reversing your actions that you've taken can be difficult, maybe even impossible, and you need to live with that. So understanding consequences and addressing negativity, both negative influences, negative feelings, is something I am really glad to see more showcased, I guess, in this show.
Oh, definitely. It's something. I felt like at first when I saw that scene and I saw, basically how Sweetie Belle and Rarity and how the relationship was kind of breaking down, I was almost shocked because it's so unusual to see that level of animosity amongst the characters on this show. And at first I looked at that, I'm like, it's like it just seems kind of weird or odd. But then the more I really kind of thought about it, and then going back and watching the episode again, it occurred to me that it's more of just my reaction towards just not being used to seeing that on the show. But at the same token, it makes their relationship, it makes the way that they are dealing with each other more real, because it's like even in real life, it's like amongst siblings and even amongst friends, it's like that you do sometimes get into those situations where things can get pretty heated, they can get pretty riled up, and that they actually went to the degree on this episode to show that and not really hold back, I think was actually ended up being a very good thing in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, for sure. Though it's also, I think, necessary from a storytelling point of view. People were going in saying, "Oh, I've lost respect for Sweetie Belle's character. I don't really get those kind of complaints." But with Some Pony to Watch Over Me, the fact that Applejack was so over the top, first of all, I think it's hilarious, especially given her character. And you need that motivating factor to balance with the actions the other character takes. If Applejack had just been a little bit too babying of Apple Bloom, I doubt she would, run off on her own to deliver pies to a swamp or something. Same thing with Sweetie Belle here. The fact that she would destroy Rarity's work, for a important client, if there hadn't been that elevated level of animosity, even if it's a little bit forced, you can't really see the characters doing that, right? So there needs to be that trigger, I guess.
One thing I will say, and I'll give Sweetie Belle credit for, is I was very impressed by her ability to know how to perfectly, almost surgically go in there and sabotage Rarity's entire presentation for the next day, simply by pulling out one tiny piece of string. I was like, that's almost like a master stroke in terms of the ability to sabotage. So
it was set up, though. It was set up. That was nice.
Well, she wasn't actually there though, because she was at her performance when Rarity was putting the stitch in and giving the talk about how that was like the key stitch to hold everything together.
That's true. She wasn't there, but I mean, she is Rarity's sister, so she's around when she's working in these things, I guess.
Yeah, that's just one of those things, though. I mean, I'm wondering, does Sweetie Belle's future cutie mark, will it have something to do with her ability to actually surgically destroy things?
Let's hope not. Let's hope not.
From looking at this season as a whole, and just the way that the CMC episodes, we've had a couple CMC episodes that were pretty much about the entire team, but I feel like there's almost a trilogy within this season, because we had an episode that focused on Scootaloo growing up and facing some trials and becoming better as a result of that with Flight to the Finish. As we've discussed, we had Some Pony to Watch Over Me, which focused on Apple Bloom. And then we have now For Whom the Sweetie Belle Toils, which is focusing on Sweetie Belle. Do you think that this was something that the writers at the beginning of the season did on purpose, that they sat around and said, we want to do an episode for each of the CMCs that focuses on that character and kind of the trials and tribulations of growing up?
I absolutely do. And I think that not only did they make good lessons, but even in terms of developing an arc for the CMC, the characters, you need these moments that really mark a change in the character. How much it shows up in later episodes remains to be seen, but if we didn't have these, then how exactly are the characters growing up? They're just getting older. That doesn't equate to growing up. So no, I definitely think that it was intentional. I'm glad to see, and I hope that they continue that, because there is still a lot that these characters can learn, and they're the perfect characters in the show for these kinds of lessons that are important, I think, for a lot of the viewers, things that the main six aren't really suited for telling.
I also really like that this season they've taken the focus on the CMC away from getting their cutie mark, and to the point where, previous seasons, a CMC episode was almost assuredly going to in some way entail, what are they going to try next to get their cutie mark, or it would be focused around their lack of cutie marks or something like that. And these episodes this season, at best, they make a passing, remark about not having their cutie marks or something, or like in this episode where, they're excited with that, hey, maybe, Sweetie Belle will get, a writing / acting / directing cutie mark. But there's really nothing more on that. It's like, it's really the sense like they've gotten over that side of the characters, and they've decided to, be like, hey, let's, instead of making this group be a gimmick or be all about a gimmick, let's actually develop them and turn them into real characters.
Well, they are very unique. Not only are they the three different kinds of ponies in Equestria, but they've got completely different personal situations and troubles that they're going to face. And yeah, sorry for the pun, but I'm glad that they didn't make the CMC into one-trick ponies. In fact, I'm glad that even if that's not the intention, they're less manic about the search for the cutie marks, because I don't think that, for starters, it shows that they're growing up, I think, a little bit, that they're not doing these insane things. But I also think that that's a step towards them actually getting their cutie marks, because when they stop doing completely random things in a manic fashion, it's more focused. Twilight Time showed that they're actually spending the time to kind of delve into things, to learn things. And I think that that's where they're really going to find out what they're meant to do, because their manic search is really, it was a shotgun approach. And that's I don't think you find out what you want to be in life that way,
No, certainly not. I think that they're really setting things up where just my guess, I could actually foresee them getting their cutie marks within the next season or two. And I think it'd be interesting because at one point I remember just even probably a year ago where it was the idea might have been that, well, where would you go from there? It's like, if you gave them their cutie marks, then, what are you going to do with these characters? It's like, that's their only real goal. And now with what we've seen so far this season, it's like, no, I could totally see them getting their cutie marks and continuing to be, interesting and characters that you could continue to tell very good stories about going forward. Because it's like by taking the focus off the cutie marks, they no longer, it no longer kind of ties them into that little box where it's like, oh, well, we can't ever give them what they want because, then? What's their motivation after that, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the episodes that we're seeing now are almost setting up for a post Cutie Mark Crusader era, maybe in next season, because we're seeing development and plots that aren't focusing on their cutie marks or the search for their cutie marks at any rate, and establishing more character dynamics that you can build these lessons off of.
I guess one other thing I thought that was very interesting about this particular episode is that I felt the composition, the layout, the way that the plot progressed was a bit different from the norm, because you really had, in my mind, to me, the whole issue with the dress and that kind of external conflict that Sweetie Belle's having with Rarity is like half of the plot, and then the sequence with the nightmares and Luna and Sweetie Belle, kind of, learning a lesson within like this dreamscape is almost like another plot. And they were just very deftly kind of tied together to create like one episode. I think it was very well laid out. It's kind of the dress scenario had a moral that it was dealing with, and then the dream scenario had some morals to it that it also was dealing with.
It had that A Christmas Carol type of formula to it.
Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's exactly it.
It didn't hit me at first. It was actually somebody else that I was talking to. But aside from the fact it's not three spirits that are visiting, yeah, you've got even sort of the past, present, and future. The Sweetie Belle's 5th birthday party, which is nice. It's actually established. Although it was a little weird because she just throws it out there, and it isn't until later that we see it. But I guess if they hadn't brought it up before, there wouldn't be that impact of like, okay, this is what was setting Sweetie Belle off, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it's one of those things where to make the episode kind of work and kind of tie it all together, it made sense to reference the 5th birthday party to have, a specific moment in time to go back to. But at the same token, like kind of what we had mentioned earlier, I don't necessarily feel like this idea that, occasionally Sweetie Belle and Rarity have a bit of a falling out. It certainly is a theme that we've seen in the past. So it's not like they just sprung that out of nowhere.
You're seeing that trigger. This isn't just the one thing that set Sweetie Belle off. It's been this history of these things. But then in the present, you see Sweetie Belle kind of reflecting on what she's done to Rarity. And then, of course, the future showing why, she needs to, what's going to happen if she doesn't change. But in this case, it's changing immediately, undoing what she just did. So it's an interesting parallel, and I really don't see that being a coincidence, do you?
Oh, no, definitely not. Although I will say that I think Sweetie Belle did at an early age learn that you can't out-fabulous the element of fabulosity.
Element of fabulosity, that's a new one.
But in the whole like Christmas Carol angle, though, that's I think that was actually used quite well, because I think it's the idea of a lesson being learned by seeing, basically it's like cause and effect at its most like distilled form. It's like, here's what happened in the past that, kind of set the stage. Here's what's happening right now. And then this is going to be the consequences in the future. And it's kind of like, you've taken the most base concept of understanding, that actions have consequences, and put it out there. And that really allowed them to tackle a lot, provide a lot of information, show a lot of what's going on in a very brief space of time. I mean, I think the nightmare sequence only lasts for a few minutes, but it covers a lot of ground. I think it covers it rather well.
Absolutely. And going back to my comments on Sweetie Belle actually being pretty horrible in this episode, I like that especially the earlier parts of the dream sequence were almost addressing fundamental attribution error. The fact that Sweetie Belle wasn't really looking at Rarity's point of view. It was about what she was witnessing, whether it was with the birthday party or with the dresses. The fact that, Rarity's trying to upstage me, not the fact that Rarity really wanted to help. And it's seeing from that outsider point of view, right? You're forcing people to reflect on it outside of the situation. And, I think that in and of itself is a good lesson, because there's trap that people fall into all the time, and that leads to a lot of animosity, I think, because they are misunderstandings, because we can get very caught up in ourselves and our point of view, and we're looking at the actions of others rather than the intentions of others.
Oh, definitely. That's something that I think that is a very good lesson for the younger viewers of the show, but it's actually something where I've run into plenty of teenagers and adults that still as far as I can tell, never really learned that lesson. They're just very close-minded. They cannot possibly see or attribute anything to anybody else that they encounter outside of what they know themselves. They can't imagine that people might have reasons for doing things that they personally would not have, or they would never have that same reason for doing it. And so, I mean, I think this is something where that's a lesson that really is valid for pretty much everybody. It's something that just reminding people of that is just a useful thing in and of itself.
That absolutely is. That is a really important lesson. And again, something that I'm glad to see demonstrated so well in the show, the need and the consequences of that kind of behavior. We're almost out of time here. Are there any other points in this show that you wanted to bring up quickly?
I did want to say that, and I think this goes to one of the reasons why I really, really enjoyed this episode, was that even getting outside of those morals and those good lessons that came out of that whole nightmare sequence, I felt that kind of the A plot or the A story had its own lesson in terms of Sweetie Belle kind of learning about sometimes, in life you're going to have a situation where, something that you try and you put a lot of effort into is not going to result in, what you were looking for. I mean, she wanted, accolades. She wanted everyone, to, tell her how great of a job she had done on something that by the end of the episode, she readily admits probably wasn't maybe that great to begin with. And on top of that, when the desired result did not come about, instead of, kind of looking at, trying to maybe learn something from it, her immediate reaction was to basically assign blame to others for, her own shortcomings on this. And I mean, I think that's in itself is a very powerful and a very good lesson, and something that I think the episode did a great job of kind of showing how that comes about and, what would be a better way of responding.
Definitely. And again, something very relatable, because whether you're at the Cutie Mark Crusaders age or you're, an adult, that kind of behavior it's a trap that's easy to fall into for lots of people. So definitely a well worth a lesson to be showing. Frankly, I was just kind of glad that the dolphins weren't some kind of MacGuffin, because in the dream sequence, they actually have, when Sapphire Shores is talking to the audience and says, "Who wants to hear a funny story about my ex-costume designer?" There's actually 2 big dolphins on this stage. So I'm like, okay, I like that they actually set that up. They did set that up, not just with the dolphins in the dream, but they actually tied them to Sapphire Shores earlier in the episode. That was something that was really bothering me, that just felt a little too Deus Ex Machina, but at least there's a little attempt to tie it in earlier on.
Oh, yeah, and there's also the part where when Sweetie Belle is initially falling from the star staircase and going through the water, where there's a few dolphins that swim by. So I think I feel like that's something where it maybe that's even a point where, like, since Luna was kind of in control of the dream, and since I think to me it feels like Luna kind of was guiding things and kind of knew where she wanted this to go. That maybe that was just something that she, maybe subconsciously kind of slipped in, because she knew that dolphins were going to somehow, be in the future for this whole situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, once again, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to again thank Reldan from Everfree News for joining us today. Thank you.
Hey, it's been a pleasure.
And join us next week for our review of Season 4, Episode 20, Leap of Faith. This has been EFN Presents. Thanks for watching.